10:30.
10:30.
Or 10.
Yeah, that's the privacy bills.
Now I gotta find something, right?
Let's take a Mary's spot, anybody?
But there is another 9 o'clock that we could be done. That's,
Did Mary want somebody to take her spot?
no, wait a minute.
If she can make it back?
I don't know.
I don't know, I know that she got
Morning.
Ann told me yesterday,
Yeah, I
that
thought.
she's to replace Mary at the chair's stand.
Yeah.
I've missed it.
But, yeah, I thought, my understanding was Ann was supposed to replace her here.
Oh, I don't know, I don't know.
I do, yeah, it's downstairs, right up on the elevator. How are you, Bill?
Good.
See, there are two at 9 o'clock, you could be, no, this is both of ours, so, yeah. this-
All right, so
So you're not on this
I'm
one?
a free agent until 10:30.
Yes,
That means I can have some coffee today.
yes.
How much is your cost?
Free agent.
I only work for 10 cents an hour, so.
Gosh, that's pretty inexpensive. You know, I don't know if you're gonna get hired, that people are gonna look at that and say, why 10 cents an hour?
Well,
Maybe it should be like $10 an hour.
Minimum wage?
there's a whole,
$7.25.
there's a whole squawk in today's
No, he's
paper
at the lower minimum wage.
about,
Well, that's $7.25,
He gets
isn't it?
tips, he can just tip him.
That's right. Yeah, he's gonna be a part-timer, he's gonna get in
I think the public can be rather parsimonious. Blurb in the Valley News today about selectmen getting free pizza like that, select board members, and that was outrageous.
They make so much money.
They make so much money by serving on select boards, it's just a total rip-off of the public treasury.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and open up the subcommittee meeting. We will first take up 1508, relative to terminating state participation in the Common Core educational standards. Showing we have members here, which would be Grenier, Jim Fraser,
Somebody's sitting right next to you.
Mary Guile is a member of this committee. I don't know if she's back in town yet or not. And I was under the impression that Ann Brassey was going to take her spot, but maybe she's at another meeting at this point in time. But we will go ahead and begin. I'm handing out two members of the committee, just for your information right now, some information about the Common Core that I've put together, explaining Common Core, who established that Common Core, the National Governors Association, a council of chief state school officers. It's not a national doctrine. It was initiated under the Bush administration. Unfortunately, I think Race to the Top and the Department of Education at the federal level made this a political thing. And that's the unfortunate part. Why Common Core? We're hearing from employers that we need to up the ante in terms of the standards bar in science, tech, engineering, mathematics. That's a given. I think everybody recognizes that there's a need to better the standards. Going on down, there's a host of reasons that are listed there. Common Core versus the previous New Hampshire standards. In looking at the Fordham Foundation report, you can see the relationship between the standards we once had in English language arts and mathematics versus what were rated by that organization. We do know that we have, when we're looked at instruments like the Program for International State Assessment, student assessments, that we're not ranked well within those 30 industrialized countries. And further information there. We do also know that we have a number of students that are going on to community college which are needing remediation, and by upping the standards and emphasis on these subjects, I believe that we can break that cost down or reduce that cost of remediation. A number of states support this, and I listed all the agencies which support, and not all, but many of them. It's interesting to note that there are folks which like the BIA, the New Hampshire Business Roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce, and in my neck of the woods, all local business up there are very strong advocates of doing something to strengthen our standards. There's a number of politicians out there which have voiced support for that. They're listed here: Jeb Bush, Bill Bennett, Engler, Christie, Huckabee, Jindal, who will be in our state here later on, Mitch Daniels, etc. Going on down that list, you'll have a number of CEOs which are also in support, from Intel to Farmers Home Insurance, Exxon, National PTA has indicated enthusiasm for supporting the implementation of these standards, the NEA. We believe that this initiative is critical first step in our nation's effort to provide every student with a comprehensive, content-rich, and complete education. New Hampshire College and University Council, that's Tom Corrigan, has also provided his support. New Hampshire Board of Education, of course, who is a proof-limiting principal. Ed Hirsch, E.D. Hirsch, who is the writer of the Core Knowledge Program, respects the concept of core knowledge and knowledge. One thing I do want to emphasize here, that Smarter Balanced is not part of the core standards. There's a lot of concern, and I will voice some of my concern for the Smarter Balance. There's a number of questions which I have not had resolution in my own mind on that. However, this bill is dealing with the standards. And so we're dealing with those standards in which we're going to define in the bar for knowledge and skills that we're teaching and learning in our schools. So with that little rundown from the perspective that I have, we've had a lot of testimony. Cards have been thick, and I think you all have recorded the reactions of folks and rationale for that. I've heard both sides of it. I've heard some folks on one side you can voice interest in, yes, maybe standards have to be increased, but there are issues there as well. So I'll open up the discussion right here. And
I'd like to start off by just clarifying what some of the concerns are. The fundamental concern, I believe, is it's perceived, correctly or incorrectly, perception is more important than fact, that this is part of a national agenda, and actually when national leaders like the President and others speak to it, I think it only exacerbates. I also feel that there is a perception, although there is much to the contrary, that this will dumb me down, and yet then we have others who say it's too challenging. And one of the things I'd just like to say on this, given that I had almost 4 decades in education, is some of the perceptions we're using to criticize some of the examples in the test, and again, it isn't the test, but it is part of the Common Core standards to teach thinking skills, is the one we see in here with subtraction. And at the lower levels in math, we don't teach subtraction. That can't be defined until the students know the sign numbers. What we actually are teaching is the positive difference between 2 numbers. And it's defined in terms of addition. And I don't mean to give you a math lesson, but it does point out why we're having a problem. The classic example, and I listen to these, and they're posted, and I pay attention. 4 plus 3 is 7 is a fundamental concept that we need to develop subtraction. And the actual way we do this, without contradicting the lack of closure in the whole number system, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., is to say this and develop the concept. 4 plus one number, what number equals 7? And ultimately that is used to define subtraction. It is incorrect to say a number subtract a second, because we know that 5 minus 12 doesn't work at that level. This development is a thinking skill that happens early. And I'll finish only by saying when students are mistaught this, it's actually worse than if they're taught poorly, because when it comes time to do order of operations, sign numbers, these kids are handicapped. And I could get into a similar problem with division, with cutesy little simple ways to compute that lead to big problems. And the other thing I wanted to state is very many of our students don't get to the level of math they're capable. And we know that a crow, the bird, can do subtraction up to 3 digits, and we know that by experimentation. You can't tell me that a 7 or 8 year old human being can't do the sort of stuff that's portrayed in this. So we're dealing with the same old perfunctory computational concepts that have been around for 3 or 4 decades that now are not acceptable for our future. And for our jobs, we don't need to work with detailed computation. What we need to know is, how is math important? And so, for that reason, I find that we're having difficulty getting across the idea of thinking skills when we keep wanting to use simple computation as justification to what we have in our standard. And there is also a confusion between curriculum and standard. And one of the problems is some people don't choose their curriculum correctly in the standard. And so that's my observation of where we are with the Common Core. I could go on forever, but I won't, as an example of why we need thinking skills at a lower grade.
A standard is basically what a student should know and be able to do.
An objective.
It's an objective. Then we have those 3 components of education there, which is the learning process of instruction, curriculum, and assessment. Now you could, in your mathematics, to teach that, to arrive at that objective, that standard, you could use Saxon math or any other math program you wanted to, and how you instruct it is very, very important. I think we're talking about a local issue here in terms of those 3 components. And the standard is the bar which we want kids to know and be able to do. I, for one, if I were a math teacher, I'd probably go the opposite direction what you would. I would use Saxon math throughout my whole school. And I would probably have scores which come out which are superlative. Kids can do it. Teachers know what to instruct. It's a relatively program. That might not work in another place. It may not work. It may not work at for somebody in the high school. I know that they'll come up and say, "Oh, Chicago math's much better." On and on and on we go. That's local, as I'm concerned.
No, this notebook is filled, this is not the Common Core. And I've attempted to read every bit of correspondence that's come to us, pro and con. And it seems to me that these are the concerns that I've raised. The federal mandate, that the local school district must participate. Loss of local control, the lack of input by people all around the core, the national curriculum. You mentioned the rigor, both plus and minus. Some think it's too much, some think it's not enough. The lack of teacher vetting, the test and the technology that's available to administer the test. There's been 2 national validators that basically have been advocating against the Common Core, 2 out of 29. The issue of data privacy, another issue, and then the moratorium of the high state test. Now, I've looked at those 11 items, and I think they've all been answered. Now, they may have been answered, but folks may not have liked the answer. But they've been answered, to my satisfaction. And I think the concern that I have is that this is a huge change. It's the biggest change I've seen since I've been in education. And the biggest change, I think, is moving from a jeopardy approach to education, question answer, versus question answer proof. And it's the proof that I think is a major change. And I think it's hard for parents to And so it's not a matter of 2 times 2 is 4, but why? Why is 2 times 2 4? Just as an example. And I think that's the trigger that's caused folks concern about this. And frankly, I think it does go back to the point, I think Jim, you were talking about, it does bring us to a higher order of thinking. And in today's time, we need a higher order of thinking. I mean, some of the side comment I've heard is that, well, you know, I went through an education, I did okay. That argument doesn't persuade me one damn bit, because we've got students who are coming to schools now with a much higher capability of gathering information. I mean, I'll never forget when I was in, just before I left Washington, I had this young man pulls out, and this was like 10, 11 years ago, pulls out his iPhone. So the functionality of that phone was much less than this one. And he says, Mr. Meyer, he said, ask me a question. I asked him a question, goes like this. Is that the answer? I said, yeah, that's the answer. He says, I don't need to go to school to get the answer. I need to go to school to learn how to use the answer, how to think, how to assess it. I believe that Tom Quinn does it. And so, 1508, as far as I'm concerned, would set schools back, way back. Because we've got, frankly, most of our schools are 3 years into this program now anyway. And so I just think that, that 508 is, 1508 is inexpedient legislation.
Go ahead, Jim. Yeah.
I am ready to, or vote, I feel on this. Also because, for all the reasons that all of you have said, all the things that Rick has on here, that Brad has on here,
Oh, Jane, I did that for you.
I don't,
I did put To Kill a Mockingbird in there too, though, so.
yeah, yeah, but there's
Which
2
has been-
American names, only 1 British.
Yes, and Go ahead.
This is I agree with Representative Myler that all that these questions have been answered, particularly, I think, a lot of the passion surrounding this seems to be around the feeling that there wasn't enough consultation, but I went back and read all the materials that were given us too, just in the hearings. And Heather Gage says, on this question of how much feedback they got in consultation, over 200 teachers and curriculum leaders from more than half of our elementary districts formally commented on the clarity and appropriateness of the standards in mathematics and ELA. Other parents, teachers, and higher education faculty in New Hampshire commented on their own directly to the feedback site provided CCSSO and NGA. So there was a huge amount of consultation. I'm surprised at so many people saying that they never heard about it, because with this kind of widespread consultation, it had to be available, that knowledge available, and in the news. I know it was in the news. So I do think that this particular complaint has been answered. I do think too that this represents just what it is objecting to, and that is a mandate. It is anti-local control. And Commissioner Barrett pointed out the irony that local districts were not told they had to have Common Core. I realize they believe that they were basically made to in the form of you don't get the money if you don't do it, but they weren't given a choice, whereas this gives no choice at all. As I understand it, this says to the local districts, you can't run it. And this definitely is state government overruling local control, to my mind. Also, if we're going to speak to the standards themselves, Representative Greenberg is authoritative to speak to math. I am not. I stopped math after the 10th grade, found out in the 10th grade, and I had reached my level of math. But I haven't taught English all my life. I did all my Chris. You know, I tended always to believe, and my senior English teacher had a great influence on my life. She was an amazing woman, she taught me senior English, and got a lot of us young women to go to college who might not otherwise have. I wanted to go, but a lot of people, women hadn't persuaded to go. She was a very impressive woman, and she really believed that our students, of course, this is a long time ago, that our students could do a lot more advanced literature than they were being given, and she even got permission to have a special class of students just to teach a very high-level literature class with T.S. Eliot and Wallace Stevens and writers you don't usually get in senior English. Into that, and she allowed into the class only average students, no DA students, no advanced English students in there to prove this. She let me in because I was flunking solid geometry and I needed another class. She made an exception and let me in. And she took this demonstration class to our local school to demonstrate that our students can handle this material. And that we aren't assuming they can't handle it. So I'm not saying that these standards are too high. I'm saying that I do think they're high, and I think that's good. I think our students can do it. And I don't think we're hearing from the English teachers around the state who are already doing it. Commissioner Barry said some have been doing it for 4 years, some for 3, some for 2. I don't think we've been hearing from them that they can't do it. I'm all for the rigor of these standards, and definitely don't see any dumbing down in the standards. So I think the biggest thing of all for me here, at least on this subcommittee, is simply to say that I don't see, even if I had more problems with the standards than I do, and I don't. I think it's a great move ahead. Even if I had a problem, I don't see how we could do it. It would throw the whole system into chaos to do this at this point. So I'm ready to vote IPL as well.
We started right off 5 after, and we were into it. There's a sheet there which I handed out at the beginning, which gave some concerns or points that have been identified. Basically, my position is I very much support the standards. I see some of the issues that have been brought up at the table are instructional concerns. Like we're talking about, we got to get to the higher level thinking, the critical thinking skills. Well, we could have been doing this in elementary schools with Junior Grade Books program for years and years. And those schools which did, the thinking level was obviously there, and they learned how to, the teachers themselves were able to learn how to phrase questions, which called for deeper intuitive type thinking. Also, I think we're in an age now where when you walk in a school, teachers don't say, turn off your computers. They're basically saying, keep them on and turn them on. We're going, now there are maybe some questions regarding broadband and accessibility, which is a real issue, and I think we're seeing the E-rate program look at, and they're looking at throwing $2 billion into that program. So I feel that it's instruction, curriculum, and specifically assessment where there might be questions. I'm not myself feeling an issue with the standards. And so, but Ann, you weren't here. Do you have anything you want to offer? We
No, I liked what I was hearing, and I just think that there are districts like mine that have process going on in their high schools for 4 years. This year we introduced it in our elementary and middle school. Teachers are working very hard. They're liking the work once they get into it and see that it's enabling them to see where each child is individually. You know, that's the most, I think the fear they have is the assessment is going to be used against them. Parents will say you're not teaching well enough because my child didn't do well on the assessment test. But I think that will work itself out.
Well, I have a concern with the assessment too, a real genuine concern, I think, that whenever we put assessments in the school before, when we're trying to measure our standards and what we're doing with curriculum and instruction, we've looked for a norm reference test which parallels what we're doing, whether it be the old achievement test one or the other. But now we're changing the standard, the objectives. And it's not so easy to say, well, we're going to go from the Iowa test to CAT or to something put up by Riverside Publishing. We've got to be careful, these students which are rolling through haven't had these standards. And they're just, bang, you're pushing it in for everybody right now. Whereas it may be wise to start with the kids which are going through the standards to be assessing them. That's a transitional process. It seems to me that by 2015, we're just going like that. And in my speaking with a number of superintendents, they all expect to see a drop.
Well, I've got a concern just about the volume of testing. I understand that.
Oh, I absolutely do, and I think our chair of the education
Definitely.
committee shares that same concern that we're test, and it's taking instructional time away. And as I explained to Representative Myler before, I feel that there are a lot of instructional issues, curricular issues, which are unique to each of our school districts. And they need professional time or professional training to address this. But then we're coming down on high with all this other programming, which is taking up that instructional time, and I think teachers are totally on tilt. I think they're on overload. And there be the problem. So,
Regarding 1508.
15, let's get back to our standards. That's right. Exactly.
I would move ITL.
I'll second that. Okay, no, okay, we got a motion made before we go with the ayes, okay. Is there any further discussion?
I want to make a few points, and it won't be as lengthy. One of the things, and it's sort of related to the standards and the expectation and all the testing, it's hard to separate them. I did talk to some of the folks who have concerns, and they have some legitimate concerns regarding this new idea of getting an answer, questioning the answer, maybe coming up with alternate answers in terms of how we assess that. We have used terminology in our description that is confusing. The idea of an objective assessment is confusing because to them, to many of the critics of this, what they're seeing is a subjectivity in how students are going to respond. And I think if we had used something different like multiple choice fill-in versus open response, which is used at the higher levels, the very terminology we have used has created confusion. And I had quite a lengthy discussion with a person about this, and I think we have done, not purposely, somewhat of an injustice with the terminology, and I think we need to think about clarifying that at some point. The other criticism of all testing, and I got this from a high school math teacher the other day at a local supper, is will we ever see anything, any set of standards where a kid will start in the first grade and it'll last until they're, well, we test in the 11th. We have never, in my career, started any sort of standards and related testing where it actually took the student through their career in school. And that's because of this cyclic nature of every 6 or 7 years we come up with a new idea. And that is a very legitimate concern. She said, how will I ever know if this is successful if we can't follow a kid from grade 1 up to, of course, this only covers grade 10 or 11 when the last test is given. And that is a major concern here. And so I think as we go forward and if we, and we'll have to vote on ITL, I can't do it with great happiness with some of these concerns, and I do have to raise them. I can't fail to recognize what are legitimate concerns, and I think in some cases justified, in terms of parents and others understanding exactly what is going to be expected of students. I think we can work it out, but I think we have to be attentive.
I think that's a good point, but I think the dilemma for me, I mean, I'm looking at my 4-year-old grandson, right? And I'm trying to go, what's school gonna be like for him? I don't know. I think that the access to information, the use of technology, I I don't know what's gonna happen. Because I think the one thing I like is that there, in this instance, is it does create a mark that kids, whether you're in Colebrook, New Hampshire, or you're in, you're in Gloucester, Massachusetts, there are standards that you can deal with. But as far as what schools are gonna look like and how that's gonna look, I don't know, Jim, exactly what that's gonna be, because I think it's happening so fast, the information's so fast. The access of information through technology, I don't know what's gonna happen. So I mean, I wish, if I had a magic ball that could say, okay, in 11 years, this is what it's gonna look like, I wouldn't even want to try to project that.
Well, and the other point is, we're 25th, I think, in the world in math. That didn't happen because of Common Core. That started in the 70s, maybe even the 60s. So we can't keep spinning our wheels. I have not heard a reasonable alternative to Common Core from any of the critics. And at some point, we've got to make changes. And I guess
Well, I think you're right, and the assessment side is what I keep bouncing back to. And even when we do our writing samples in the elementary school, is a teacher taking that assessment and comparing where they are with a matrix of skills that they have to meet to come out with whether the person's, I'll use the old proficient or not proficient? No, it's all computerized now. And so the writing samples which are being submitted are being graded based upon some preconceived notion.
rubric is the word.
A rubric, yeah, and so even that is getting close to bubbling in an answer, because you're gonna have to, hit this mark. So I think there's a long way, I think our assessment process, our summative assessment is gonna go through a transition here, where we're gonna have to take a real comprehensive look at what we're doing, what we expect, and if it's meeting the goals that we've established within our statutes in this state that we want through a statewide assessment program. Kansas has to review their standards every 5 years. We do it every 10. This is one of the reasons why Kansas did not go down the route of adopting Common Core. It was contrary to what they had on the books. I think that it's a good move that we go this direction, and if there's anybody else, we got another bill we gotta do here. No more discussion?
No, I'm done.
Okay, so we'll take the vote right now, we'll just do it by a show of hands. All those in favor of the motion, which is IPL, show your hand please, so it's 5, and nobody's opposed. Okay, we'll go on now to the next bill. Let me close this one up. And it's 1239. Does everybody have a copy of 1239? You may. Does everybody have it out yet? Why don't you give everybody a chance to get to that page? Okay.
Yeah, well, I read this one carefully too, and it seems to me we could break it down into 2 parts. To me, the first part, which would ask the state board to report on the fiscal impact of implementing the college and career readiness standards. Now, the date on this is July 1. Yeah, I don't. Oh, we have an amendment?
Just hand it to me, Representative Allen.
Still says July 1. This is it.
Representative Cordell, you're here. Could you explain the difference between so we won't waste time here trying to
Sure.
explain the difference between the
Very
primary bill and
simply,
this?
It adds line
Charter
6,
school?
7, right, districts and charter schools, line 6, 7, and then down again in 2019.
Yeah.
So it's the department, districts, and charter.
So that's the only change.
Thank
you. So on both locations, top and bottom, it
Oh, okay.
includes charters.
So it seems to me that at least with this date, and I think even without the date, you know, a lot of the things we just said about 1508 apply here. That this is already going on, schools are already in the middle of doing it. I think this information will ultimately be gathered anyway. And that date certainly jumped out at me. I don't know, I only taught public school for 1 year right out of college, and all my experience is in higher education. But I know the end of the term, and their terms go well into June, is just nightmare time, getting everything done. To ask them to draw this information together, to give to the school boards, and I believe Heather Gage told us that this information has not been given before. We will not only have to gather the information, they'll have to figure out how they're going to gather it. All this while they're in the usual end of term, with everything that's going on, I just don't see how, or why even we should have to do this, or do it now. The second part of the bill says in the future. To me, that's a whole different thing, and that I don't know whether it's a good or not good thing. I only know that one advantage to it might be, after our experience with Common Core and with these other bills, is that if this kind of consultation and information gathering would prevent some of the backlash that there's been against Common Core, maybe it would be a good thing. Maybe if all this information was out there, then there will be new standards coming, I understand, in social studies and the other disciplines. Maybe this would prevent some of the confusion and misunderstanding that has arisen around Common Core. Maybe this kind of bill would, in a public hearing in the executive council district, maybe that would head off the same kind of problem we've had then. So the second part alone, I think I could probably approve, but the first part seems to me that we have all the objections to it that we had to after 1508.
The other thing is that presently, textbooks are considered capital expenditures over a 5-year span in many schools. I can't speak to all.
Many also is an expendable spot.
And the point that most schools dealt with anticipating this was to include, we gotta clarify here, this is not that big of an issue for high school, because if you teach Algebra 1, there's not much change if you teach pre-cal. So those are more course-driven than grade-driven. So for our 1 through 8, it's more of an issue. So schools planning ahead as part of their textbook purchasing, there would be textbooks purchased anyway. So trying to get clear a number that's based upon the new standards and a number that is based upon, or how much would have been expended anyway. It's going to be a tough number to get a handle on. I am for data, and I would have liked to have known what the cost would be for the bill we talked about from Representative White, but this is going to be a tough one to get statistically, and it would require a lot of honesty on the part of the districts in terms of what is really going to be costs that would have happened without Common Core and what would be cost because of it. And I'm not sure the data is going to be easy to follow. That's just an observation, not a statement of fact.
Well, we did have testimony from superintendents, and a letter from superintendents that basically said the cost factor would already be built into the capital expenditure. So it seems to me the issue of cost is less of an issue because those who've already been doing it, we've already made some modifications within the current budget. So the idea that it's a unfunded mandate, et cetera, I think they're handling that they would with any change in program.
Well, I would agree with you for schools that are being current with their curriculum, but sometimes you go 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Should they have done curriculum updates anyways? So, but we can't beat on schools that save money for textbooks trying to get by and get their budgets passed. So, I wouldn't mind having the data, I just don't know how practical it is to get this data, and that would be my concern.
Any other?
Well,
comments?
certainly not by July 2014. My school district doesn't even close the books on the year until maybe September. You know, when all the bills finally come in and they're all paid and we get our financials, it's usually close to September before we really know the state of the budget from the previous year. So this would be a burden. And probably one that couldn't even be accurately defined by July 1st.
Do you think if we made it voluntary, that but then it would take the statistics, but some schools may be able to provide that fairly easily, others, but again, if you get all from one side or the other, it's not gonna be a valid set of data.
And they're all in flux in where they are. You know, my high school's been doing this for 3 years, but we just started with the elementary and middle school, so it's apples to oranges comparing the districts, where they are and how could you look at that data realistically?
Just the gathering of the data, I think, is a good goal. Just getting the information is.
It would be.
Well, they're huge issues that are cost issues. These can't be, we can't throw them away. I believe there's some disparity issues in terms of broadband throughout this country and throughout this state. And if that is a part of the testing program or a part of the instructional program, curricular program we're seeing here, then there's a cost there that's going to impact some districts which maybe don't have the means, and we're going to have to look to, like I mentioned earlier, the E-rate, and try to get some support that comes in through grants. The current NECAP testing which we're using right now is paid for by the state. Those costs are not paid by the local school district. Those are paid by the state, so that is not a Part 128A issue. So I'm not concerned there with that. I am concerned with the costs, which are maybe not a dollar and cent cost, but they could be equated that way, of the enormous amount of testing that we're doing in our schools and the time that's subtracting from instruction. And the costs associated with preparation of our staff, professional training to administer this will be the Smarter Balanced test. That will be a cost, but that's also going to be taking out for testing grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11. As we're doing with NECAP, there's already been questions on the NECAP about the instructional time that it subtracts and teaching to the test, etc.
Here's somewhat of a question or an idea. Many schools right now go through the time and cost of doing NWA, some 3 times a year. If this test, now that it's digital, also had a mirror bank of sample tests that schools could use, and I know this is theoretical, but I don't know if it's possible. I know we have sample Smarter Balanced tests, but if we had the ability to eliminate this parallel testing and cost of NWA, which is used very efficiently with some schools, that would actually be a big offset for the local school district in terms of time spent testing, which is getting out of control, particularly if you have semester and end-of-year finals. So that was an issue I had, but never found a point to talk about it here. I don't know, but perhaps with the correct support of this whole program, we would have a parallel type of testing that could be used to identify in real time where a student is, which is what NEWA does, and allow for instructional change during that school year, and maybe that.
And that's a local decision. They're making that choice to use NEWA, or they're making a local decision to use Star Math, Star Reading, which is an online test that gives you immediate feedback, which you can get your NCE scores, etc., to report to for Title I, the feds, the state. So that's all done locally. I don't think we're talking about that here in this bill. We're talking about the other component here, this statewide assessment. And I know that Mel likes to say it's not high stakes. It's not like your SAT, ACT, which, you know, you go to apply for a job and the first thing they might ask is, I want to see your ACT scores.
Well, it doesn't go
When you are a
that far.
junior.
And also, it's not a graduation requirement, which is true in Massachusetts and I believe New York. So in terms of high stake, it's not high stake for our students, there's nothing different about that. And we aren't going to hold them to passing this as a graduation requirement. I believe in the bill there is some possibility that teachers might have a component in their teacher evaluations, although I don't know quite how that'll work if the teacher doesn't teach this subject where we have the test, or English or math, and teaches music or art. And so I'm just concerned again whether or not this will be able to give the school real-time feedback and allow them to use this test to change instruction in a timely fashion, as is done with some of the other ones you mentioned. If we could eliminate the need for some of the others with this testing program, it would be very useful, I think.
Well, remember, this bill deals with fiscal impacts and costs.
Yeah, no, I understand,
So,
but it's still part of the
but
big
it all-
picture.
But when I'm hearing from the superintendent where I am, he's saying that this is not going to cost us anything in terms of testing. That's provided by the state already. We have the costs for development of staff built in our budget. We have the costs for textbooks, which we built. It's a cyclical type deal where every so many years we adopt. And so their budget is not looking at any increases.
And this bill actually says, this right here, the state board shall not adopt or implement new college or career readiness standards, which is the Common Core. Nor shall the state direct the Department of Education to implement any additional standards until the state board in consultation, you know. So this basically, if this passes, what we just ITL'd in 1508 would counter the 1508.
Right.
So notwithstanding the conversation of the need to have the information, this is asking for more than the information. It's saying, you can't do anything until you get more information, stop. And I'm not for that.
And there was the Michigan study where they did this. My questions, I guess, I'm gonna bring up under HB 1432.
If I, and maybe you can ask the department also, it is my understanding based on the department, the meeting we had at the department in September, college and career readiness is the umbrella for all the standards. Science, social studies, English language arts, math, they're all under the New Hampshire College and Career Readiness Standards. That's what I was referring to in here, not specifically Common Core, which are two elements of the New Hampshire College and Career Readiness Standards.
I understand that, and you're talking about 193C:3, which addresses those areas which we use in our statewide implementation assessment process. And it talks about the English language arts, the mathematics, but also geography and history and civics. And it goes on in science, it talks about those subjects. I have questions too, how we assess those and how we're going to do that. Is it going to just be through the inputs or for the performance? So my questions, I'm going to reserve most of mine for when we do discuss HB 1432. This bill right here, I agree with Representative Myler. We've gone through and approved or make recommendations for 1508. I think this just, undoes what we just previously did. So I guess I'm through discussing. I'm ready for somebody to make a motion here.
Well, I'm thinking that there are some ideas here that are beneficial, that could be beneficial for us, but I don't think this is the vehicle.
Yeah, and it's statewide testing. I think we need a comprehensive look at it, but absolutely, no question. And there's a lot of issues dealing with, from evaluation of staff to evaluating all those subjects on 193C:3. There's a whole slew of questions which I have developed already for the next bill, which comes up at 11 o'clock, which I'm not on that committee. So,
But
but in
if,
this bill,
since Representative Cavalli is here, if we were to do something to extend the date and also take the part that essentially blocks implementation of Common Core out of this bill and go forward with some of the positive parts of this, then if that happened by the time we had exec, which would be pretty quick, then might there be some chance of getting that information? I only ask that because I think there is a need to actually answer the question, what did this cost? Or maybe it doesn't cost as much as we think. We've heard a lot of numbers and they weren't validated in my mind. It's never bad to have information. Sometimes we don't like the results, but sometimes maybe we would. And so is it primarily the part that takes Common Core out of the picture? And I think the date, and then should all schools participate? If schools have done it with no additional cost, but others had these additional costs, it would be good to hear from. I mean, I'm posing that as a question. That statement, I think, would be useful, as long as this doesn't block the previous bill.
Well, I think I'm scheduled to exec this today, I think, aren't we?
Yes,
Well,
I think getting it rewritten and agreeing on it by the time we have executive one is gonna be almost impossible.
I have crafted some language for amendment to 1432. But in looking at the actual costs here, if you look at the costs of NECAP, and you look at the implementation costs, if you do the smarter balance in paper pencil, you're talking 15-point-something dollars or $16 per person. If you're talking NECAP, you're up around 29. If you're talking about online for smarter balance, you're down around about 22, 25, somewhere in there. So the costs are not going to be any more than what we're already spending and receiving from the federal government and raising ourselves for testing. I don't have the exact figures, but I know those are ballparkish figures.
I moved to ITL.
Okay, motion made by Representative Myler, second by Representative Grassi. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Show of hands. All five zip. Thank you very much. We're
we finished on time?
5 minutes prior to.
Yes. Actually, this committee doesn't start until 10:30, right?
Well, it doesn't, but we have a amendment
Rick,
going there
thanks.
that I have to go